All right. I just hit the record button, folks. These are wild times. This is all being digitized. Love it. All right, cool. Well, Ben, hey, we're excited to have you on today to talk about Multivictor games for modeling coexistence. This is going to be great. I'm a big fan of We All Take from the River. Zoe and I have talked about it quite a bit. Yeah, just excited to chat with you today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your game and kind of all that good stuff. Give us the intro.
Sure. So my name's Ben. I am a local to the DMV, and I have a background in political philosophy and a little bit of legislative journalism. So that was sort of my entry into the game. I mean, I've played board games kind of my whole life, but that was the way that I got started thinking like, yeah, I want to make a board game. Was this interest in policy and particularly in what I like to call motivational systems. So that's true of games, and it's true. So motivational system could be anything from a game to a government, where basically you set rules, and those rules will, assuming people follow them, or even with the knowledge that sometimes people won't follow them, that leads you towards certain motivations that people have. And one thing that I think is really cool about board games is how you can control those motivations. You can say, okay, if you're going to accept my premise of like, this is how you win, or this is what you're trying to do, let's see what other behaviors that selects for. And I find that just really fascinating. And that's spurred on my love of board games.
Oh, that's awesome. So we need to change the name of the event real quick to motivational systems. I think we need to have to retool the entire thing. I love it. That's a great phrase. Awesome. Well, let's dig a little bit deeper then. So, obviously, you had your I believe it's your first published game, We All Take from the River. What was the main inspiration for that? What inspired you to also kind of give it that sort of multi-victor twist and spin? What kind of brought you on that journey?
Yeah, so I come from a policy background, and the games I played, in particular, games like war game kind games, and also games like I started with the really popular one, Settlers of Catan, was like my intro to like heavier board games, and it went up from there. Mm-hmm. And I have this frustration as someone who has a policy background, which is that if only one player can win, then you know what your relationship is with everyone else just from the get-go. And so the reason I wanted to make that was, I mean, my original intention, it was like, I want to make a game where any number of players can win and make it a multi-victor game specifically to represent policymaking and what that's like. Because in real policymaking, like real diplomacy, it's not like every country on earth is trying for world domination and they're just, playing their position for that angle. Like most countries don't actually want to conquer the globe. Maybe some do. But so that's not really what diplomacy means. In diplomacy, everyone can win. But they don't necessarily all win. So if you make it a fully cooperative game, then that kind of detracts from it because, at the end of the day, we're all on the same team.
Right.
And that can't be true in order to represent policymaking, because that's not that you're not on the same team. You're looking out for yourself. You're just doing it with the knowledge that looking out for yourself doesn't have to mean attacking someone else or detracting from what someone else needs.
Love that. And super agree with everything you just said in terms of
awesome.
Like how that can inspire games and how those can feed into systems and these types of games. Cool. Well, I've had the pleasure of playing We All Take from the River several times now, and everything you just said, I can see how it feeds into the game, right? So it's not just I always love when I hear this kind of stuff, and it's not just the designer saying it, like that is tuned into the game experience that you've created, which is great. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I found particularly compelling is just how the river itself, that key variable of the game, just had such a profound impact on everyone's individual goals, right? And so like everyone was playing with the same system, but we all were really doing very different things or pushing for different things, and we would have friction in very different ways, which I thought was really fascinating. How did you bake those sort of variable goals into this game, and what were some of the things that you were kind of considering as you developed them?
Yeah, so it all started from the like I want to have these separate goals and I want to represent policy, and then the reason it became environmental policy was because I think that's like a really clear way to demonstrate how one player's actions impact someone else's. Another advantage it has is that when you have an environment that has its own challenges to it, it gives players a little more reason to have to adapt and have to like make those difficult decisions. So like you said, like the river kind of is alive and is doing its own thing, and sometimes doing its own thing means flooding or droughts, and that causes you problems, and that spurs the little bits of conflict that say like, no, you can't just sit back and relax. Even if you're playing as the altruist, you can't just sit there and say like, well, I'm just going to just clean up the pollution and relax because I'm sure everyone can take care of themselves. You have to actually be thinking what might happen in the future, and how do I need to respond to it. I would say I'm very much a top down designer, which in terms of like game design, what I mean by that is I focus on what's the theme I want to capture and what's the like ideas I want to evoke, and then how can I go back to, okay, and what are the underlying mechanics I can use to express that.
Hmm.
So for the river especially, every single mechanic is based on let's represent some actual thing that happens in rivers, and that took a lot of research, and a lot of like talking with people who know more about environmental science than I do, because that's not my background. So there were things like, there's little bits I knew, like I know what that wetlands absorb water, and that trees deforestation increases the likelihood of flooding, and so it's thinking about, okay, how do I make sure that the game is going to represent that? How do I design a mechanic where cutting down trees does increase the risk of floods? And then there's a lot of iteration of testing that. So like for a while, when a tile flooded, the water level went down, and at some point I realized like, well, no, it shouldn't, because flooding upstream causes flooding downstream. Like that
Hmm.
is a common problem. And that's also a decision, because in some cases, actually, flooding upstream protects from flooding downstream. So there's floodplains on some rivers, and in those rivers, you want there to be flooding in certain areas that you are sort of like designated. Okay, this is where flooding normally happens, and so there's a lot more complicated environmental stuff going on, and so it's really just like a choice of, okay, what are you going to cut, what are you going to include, but all of those decisions were made on, I want this to feel like a river. I want this to be, every mechanic should be based on some actual thing that happens.
Love it. And again, true to what I felt in the game. I guess, kind of bouncing off that also, I was kind of curious. So like, obviously players have different motivations in context of the river and what they want to do in context of the game. You mentioned you did a lot of background research on, like just all the environmental science stuff, how that comes into play for the game. I was kind of curious, were the positions players had, the goals they had, were those also kind of part of that research bubble of like, what do people generally do in context of like what rivers do? Like what are these general roles that are impacted by rivers, et cetera, and like that sort of relationship to nature. Just kind of again feeling out like how you created those friction points and that those differences between players.
Yeah, so this is actually, I don't know if you saw the field guide. I made a little supplementary reading material that's called the We All Take from the River Field Guide.
Mm-hmm.
And it has all of the different roles, and it explains those roles in terms of some real life person or community, or like who might actually believe these things.
Right.
Coming up with the objectives was generally like, just let's make a list of everything someone might care about on the river, and then, okay, how do we want to represent that as a goal? Like conservation, I think in particular, is one where the conservationist wants to avoid pollution. Like their goal is to clean up pollution, but that's not really the entirety of conservation. You could have a conservationist whose goal is to make sure the fish population stays well stocked, which is actually more true to the concept of conservation. Like you could be more conserving the environment rather than keeping out pollution. And like I think you can see how pollution matters to that, but like you could have a goal where it says by the end of the game there must be X number of trees on the map and X number of fish in the river.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there must be no tiles where they are missing every resource. That could be the role there.
Right.
So that was another point of just like, well, let's like come up with the general concept of the motivation, and then let's figure out how do we want to represent that in the game, and what will be the different angles, the different motivations that occur when you change how that's represented.
Love it. Yeah, deciphering motivations is probably one of my favorite parts of game design, and it's so exciting when you can kind of really line it up to that core experience of what's happening, and then players start really digging into those motivations and role playing a little bit. It's such a fun thing. I think my favorite moment in that experience was in one of my games was I really wanted to build a city. That was one of my goals, and I built the city, and I talked someone else into helping me out, and then on the last turn of the game, there was a flood, and of course the city flooded.
Oh no!
Yeah, it was amazing. And so at that point, I was trying to figure out, well, who am I most aligned with in context of my goals still that I can help them in some capacity. And it was just a really interesting sort of thought that I was kind of processing. It's like, well, who am I as a character? What were my original goals? And now that I can no longer achieve my objective, what do I want to do to, help somebody else, and who do I want to help out? And so that was a really fun, like, narrative experience for me.
That's been a bit of a controversy about this game, is like some people have a lot of fun with that, of like the freedom of, okay, now that I've either accomplished or no, I won't accomplish my goals, what do I want to do with myself? Like there's still there's still one last turn remaining. And for some people that's like, this is stupid. Why am I still playing? I've already lost. And I'm really happy that there's folks like you who are saying like, I'm still here. I can still, maybe I want to help other people make sure they like, okay, now that I know I'm not going to succeed, let me see how many people I can help succeed instead.
Right.
Or can I drag everyone else down with me? I've seen that a lot.
I did drag down one of the capitalist players. That was funny. So that is another part.
Nice.
Yeah, yes, that was important in that game experience. So yes, yeah.
You can always take them down a peg.
Just one peg, just one. Speaking of that, Zoe and I are often talking about like single victor games in context of like how they often work within a capitalist framework, right? One of the things I really, really was fascinated about in this game. So, we talked about how like there's variable goals and, you don't necessarily know what other players' goals are. And sometimes you can work together, sometimes you can't. Players who had a capital goal in particular, that was almost not inherently single victor because multiple players could still win the game if they didn't overlap in that goal. But multiple players with a capital goal could not all achieve that capital goal, right? Only one player could achieve it. That to me was a profound and intentional choice, and it felt profound in context of all the other goals, right? Because there was always this overlap. But to me, that was a very intentional statement. Could you talk a little bit about what made you separate that from other goals and having that hard limit of win states amongst players?
Yeah, sure. So that's really when we get into like, how do you motivate people? And so when I think of someone whose goal is capital, I want someone with the capital goal to be trying to get as much money as possible. I want them to say there is no score too high for me because I need that safety net. And if you think about in terms of like, what is going to convince someone I just need to keep growing and going and going, I think having that possibility of that's what competition is for. And if you want to create that motivation, you need to say you have to be the best, because then anytime you reach a certain level, you have to be wondering, is someone else ready to come up and approach me and surpass me? If you just said like, oh, the capitalist's goal is to do kind of what the agriculturalist is doing and just get enough money, like, okay, your goal is to be just rich, then you could potentially achieve richness and say, all right, I'm done. And I didn't want that. I don't want someone to stop, in part because that spurs conflict for everyone else. Because even if you have two capitalists along the river, they're going to have to duke it out with each other. And if they sort of figure out, oh, we both really need to beef up our industry a lot because we're trying to be the richest, it doesn't just create intrigue and problems for those two players. It also means everyone else has to deal with the consequences of these two players acting so selfishly along this river. So even if you have three charitable players out there, then those guys all have to be worrying like, hey, you two, you're really impacting us. And how's that going to change the relationship dynamic of the whole group?
Right.
And I think that makes for like some really interesting diplomatic situations. And I think like, the truth is that I'm not sure capitalism. I mean, well, one thing actually is there are people who just genuinely in the real world are competing to be the wealthiest person alive. So that's not fictitious. But then there's also people who like, they're not necessarily trying to be the wealthiest person alive, but they are trying to be so wealthy that it creates problems for everyone else. And so if I just say you have to be the richest, that's going to put that person in the position to do just that, like to embody that role. Right. And so it's sort of like you were saying, it's kind of a role play thing, but it's all about trying to come up with rules that sort of force the role playing. So it's the players don't have to make the decision for themselves. Oh yeah, I'm a capitalist, so I'm going to be really greedy. It just naturally happens that's what they want to do.
Right. Love it. In one of my games, we had, I think, 2 capitalist players, and it was interesting because like I felt like they kept trying to whisper sweet nothings to everyone else, trying to persuade them to give them capital. It was such a great sort of player politicking moment in the experience. That's really cool.
You can get this interesting like kingmaker situation where you have two capitalists and one is doing way better on industry, but the other has won the favor of the other players on the map, and winning the favor of the other players on the map might actually be the better strategy because then they'll give you resources and say like, no, you know what? You've been really nice to me this whole time. We're going to help you out. We're going to put you up in the lead because of that.
Right. Awesome. Zoe, Zoe's out in California, and I keep trying to tempt Zoe to fly out and play this game. Just get one plane ticket, fly out to the East Coast, and play with me.
I don't have game nights like as often, so I've been like desperate to play this game, but like I've not had like the time. And I also, for some reason, I thought it was sold out, but I realized that it was not, and I literally bought it just before this dialogue at Dusk. So like I've been like looking on the other side of the glass, like let me play this amazing game.
If you ever do come over here, then you could play it with the designer. I would be so happy to join you for a game.
Oh my God, I would love that. Well, I'm going to be in Philadelphia, but yeah,
that's pretty close.
Quite that area.
Will you be at PAX Unplugged, Ben?
I'm not. There's sort of like, I'm small enough time of a designer that the cost of like being like showing at PAX Unplugged is too much for me. Like I don't quite have enough games to be worth selling there. Maybe next year, maybe we'll see. Or sometime in the future. And unfortunately I just can't attend as a just to go see all the cool games that are going to be there just by myself.
Totally fair. I wanted to, I know we had kind of saved some of this for later in terms of our line of questions here, but I wanted to dig into it a little bit sooner. You mentioned that there was some maybe some player controversy, right, around, different end states, what happens the last turn, et cetera. Zoe and I have certainly been dipping our toes into a lot of multi-victor games, and some of the things that you mentioned, I'm sure both of us and a lot of the folks listening in here as designers have seen on some level in their playtests, prototypes, et cetera. But you have gone on the self-publishing journey now. You've brought a game into on the market with some of those things in mind. Are there any kind of interesting tidbits or lessons that you've taken from this experience? Is there anything that you would change, or is it kind of still full steam ahead in these types of experiences?
I mean, it's still kind of full steam ahead because at this point it's like, this is what I'm doing and I want to keep doing it. But there's definitely so one thing is that I came into this as a designer a little naive. I have played board games a lot, but I was not part of the board game community. And as I became a designer and started I didn't have a Discord. I found out you really need to have a Discord. And as I joined these groups and I start talking to people, I hear one thing that became very common for me was just people rattling off. I'd say oh, I have this idea for a game. And someone say, oh, that sounds just and then they list 3 different board games that reminded them of. And sometimes it's whoa, okay, someone already has something very close to my idea. And other times it would be that's really not very similar to what I'm talking about. It's just that people there's such a devoted fan base of people who really know board games and know everything that's out there. And I think that's that can be kind of a double-edged sword. So like I would say I had this advantage of not having any expectations for what already is out there in the world and what should be out there in the world. And the reason that's controversial is like, you guys probably know this as designers of multi-victor games. People are not used to that. That is a foreign concept to a lot of game testers and players, and that can come with pretty mixed results. Where some people say like, "This is different than what I've ever experienced, and I really don't like that. That's not what I want."
Right.
And I've gotten some pretty harsh negative reviews of just like people who didn't quite, I'd say, get what I was going for. And that's I don't want that to sound like sour grapes of like, oh well, you only didn't like it because you didn't understand it. But in a way, I think that is what happened. And like
Yeah.
I have to reconcile with like, okay, if I'm trying to make a product to sell, then if I'm isolating people because they don't understand what I'm trying to accomplish, that's something I need to be willing to accept or make adjustments for. So that's been like an interesting learning experience, is finding out, okay, what actually is out there, and
Right.
how can I phrase my game in terms of something that is going to prompt someone to say, okay, well, this is different than what I expected, but it has these other aspects that actually seem pretty cool. Like I can say, oh, it's a resource management social deduction game.
Right.
I've had people be like, oh, it's a social deduction game. Now I get what you're trying to do. Now I've got a better understanding of it.
Right. We've, we've dealt with this a lot now at this point. I think there's two factors at play, at least in my opinion. One is kind of going what you mentioned, that people have a lot of expectations, and so when you're doing these games that are so uniquely different, you have to work double time to set so many like relevant and important and simple expectations on why this is different, so they can embrace that in advance. And even then, it doesn't always work out, right? But like my experience is like, if you throw folks into these types of games and they don't know what to expect on any level, they're going to be really frustrated, because all they're going to reference back to is all the other games they've played. And most of these other games are single victor or cooperative experiences exclusively. There's no overlap. And then the other thing I've found, I love this convention. I talked Zoe into going into it last year. There's a convention in the DC area called MagFest. And it has a lot of play. It's not a board game convention. It's a video game and music convention, but it has a lot of board game players. And a lot of these board game players are not traditional hobbyists, and they love multi-victor and victorless
awesome.
games. They're obsessed with them. And part of that is because, at least in my experience, they have no previous hardcore expectations with catalogs of games on their shelves, right? And so they play it and they're like, oh, this is normal. This is cool, right? This is just a game that I'm playing. And that friction is just non-existent. And so something that I've sort of taken from that experience and just kind of throwing these games out there over the years is, a lot of the time it's kind of like you said, you got to figure out, well, either you need to lean into your niche audience and find who that is, or you have to figure out a way to help other players adapt who have those previous expectations. It's a really tricky thing. So wishing you best of luck there, and you have a fan out of me. So at the very least, I'll buy your next game.
And best of luck to you too. I mean, as you're making your multi-victor games, I hope people are able to pick up what you're putting down.
Yeah, you got a whole audience of people in here, I believe, that are generally, at least most of the folks in here have or are thinking about making a multi-victor game. So there's a pretty big designer community that's slowly growing.
I would love to see more of it. I have not, that was part of the motivation for making this, was I don't know that I can't name any multi-victor games. I mean, certainly I couldn't then, and even now, I definitely can't name any multi-victor games that have been published in the same way, like mainstream games that have made it into the public eye.
Right. It's an extremely small list. I think, Zoe, you did a deep dive on this a while back, and I helped a little bit, but we haven't. It's not in the dozens or anything. It's less than 10 or something like that.
It might be a dozen, but some of those are really stretching the definition. We made a little list on BGG of games that kind of fall into that multi-victor or victorless. I think probably the most popular ones that I could think of off the top of my head are Dead. Oh shoot, what's
Dead of Winter?
On the name. Dead of Winter, yes, Dead of Winter and Fog of Love. I feel like those both kind of qualify, and also Nemesis. Those are probably some of the most popular mainstream-ish kind of multi-victor games. But yeah, we've been slowly making a home for these kind of games, or at least a home for the audience of these types of games here. Um,
That's
Pi,
great.
the last 19 digits of Pi mentions that they feel like the issue is that the people that don't understand multi-victor games are the very people that need to play them. Um, and I kind of agree with that. I think that the people who are kind of like, I don't know about this, are the ones that need to give it a taste. Um, and then Heather mentioned, Ben, is the guide around the roles and we all take from the river you mentioned for sale on your website? The field guide, is that for sale?
Um, it is for sale. It's not on my website as a button to click because I have yet to figure out Shopify properly, and so I have to figure out how to make Shopify have multiple things available in the cart. Um, so that is completely on me, but I do have more copies that are available. Um,
Okay.
and you can definitely there's a PDF version of it which I was selling for $5 and I'm kind of tempted to just make it free. Like I think at some point it's like if you're really interested enough that you want the PDF version, I'm sort of tempted to say, all right, you know what, you can just have it. Maybe that's rude to the people who previously have paid for it, though. That's one of these business things that I'm not so great at.
Most of the time, in most cases, people don't even notice. So I think you could get away with it. The couple people that do, you'd be like, sorry. But no, it's a
Yeah.
tough decision.
Oh, sorry, guys.
Sorry. Heather also mentioned lots of partyish games also feel fairly multi-victor to me, Concept being a prime example. I do reference Concept a lot in discussions because they have that blurb in their rule book that's like, we played this a lot without any points, and we loved it, but we put points in anyway for you all. And it's like, all right, well, thanks.
Yeah, that's totally. That's in fact most party games I think of as like they always have a win condition, but it's like I never care. That's never why I want to play them. Like it's just something fun to be doing with my friends.
Totally. Robert says in chat, I will say for competitive players, the idea of a multi-victor game may come off as not competitive enough, if that makes sense. I'm not a competitive person by any means, but I've played with people who will not accept that someone else will win along with them.
So that's actually interesting. I also have played with those people. Sometimes that's frustrating to them in playing We All Take from the River. I had one great situation which I was totally on board with. A player had the role of the altruist, and she was pretty competitive. And the role of the altruist is that you have to be a conservationist. You have to keep pollution from being on the map. And you also have the charity objective, which is to make sure that every other player completes at least one objective. And just for context, in We All Take from the River, you have to complete both of your objectives on your card in order to win. And so she decided, okay, I know I have to be helpful to other people, but I want to be the only winner. So I'm going to try to make sure that they accomplish one and only one objective. And
Amazing.
it was this like, okay, you are within your rights to do that. That is completely available to you. And, you know, in a way, it's like, I'm glad you found a way to make this game more fun for you. But for sure, it had that taste of like, oh, yeah, you can't accept the pot that someone else gets to win too. It has to be like you had to amend your goal to say, I want to win and I want to be the only winner.
Mm-hmm.
That's so funny. I'm just imagining like one of those like really shallow like influencers that do like altruistic
Yeah,
things but only for the clout. Like
I want to look good, but I don't want to be good.
I don't want them to actually be happier than me.
In one of the games we're publishing, Cursed VHS, there are certainly players like that we've encountered, and they're very narratively in the context of the game. Kind of, it's sometimes evil, and I'm certainly that player often. So we added a line for one of these outcomes that you can reach, which often happens to these types of players, and it just says you will be remembered for what you've done. And I think that's so funny, and it's such an impactful thing. And so the evil players read that and they're like, huh. Usually me. So And if you were a kind player, then you'll remember for what you've done. Oh, great! Well, I was a good person, so that worked out for me. The hyper competitive players in multi-victor games and even victorless games, I found some adapt to it after a little while, but some definitely don't. And I think this is just again a matter of finding your right audience or your right player for your game experience. But I have seen players come around to these types of games, and I often find that like in multi-victor experiences, the competition to me just feels more real because most things are not zero sum. It's just the nature of the beast with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no. And someone was talking to me about it, and actually like they brought up this was like someone who hadn't played the game, but sort of they brought up a point about it that I hadn't even thought of, which was it makes the betrayals so much heavier. Like
Yeah.
when if you're playing, Risk or whatever war game you want to say, where there's only one winner and the goal is world domination, any alliance you form is temporary.
Right.
That's always known. But if you're playing We All Take from the River and someone betrays you, like it's like you didn't have to do that.
Right.
That was a choice you made. Nobody was forcing your hand on that one. That was entirely on you, which can be pretty mixed. Like I realized while making this game that like I'm very much of the opinion like losing is fun too. If you're playing a game and it makes you mad, you shouldn't be playing that game. Like you games should evoke emotions, but not anger. I just don't think like it's a game. And this is a game that I think potentially could make people really mad at each other,
right?
Because of that particular like, oh, you're screwing me over, and there's not even that much in it for you. You're just doing it because of this, like you just don't have to do that.
It's very common in these types of experiences because you can't hide behind I'm just doing this to win, because often that's not the case. You're doing it because you want to do it. And I think that's a pretty interesting thing. But you're right, it's a real emotion that can come up. On the other hand, though, because just kind of on the other side of that, when people are kind in these types of games, I've often find that it's much more endearing as a result of that because you don't have to always be kind.
That weighs more too, is like, oh wow, you just like you knew you were going to lose and you decided to make sure I won just because you wanted to do that.
100%. Eric mentions in chat, as someone who bought the field guide, I absolutely support the idea of putting it out there for free. So just
thank you, Eric. I gave that a little heart.
Aw.
I really appreciate it.
And then just one more thing before we go back into our regular line of questions. Heather says, I asked about the field guide because I wanted to check to make sure I wasn't asking a question you've already answered in the field guide. I have seen things about there being different varieties of capitalism. Do different roles reflect different flavors of capitalism represented? Or is it represented more as a monolith in this game? I think the opportunity for the heaviness of meaning when people screw me or others over is something that makes me nervous to play some multi-victor games.
So I would say the capital goal is the same across every role, but and this was kind of another thing that I was pretty happy with how it worked out, is that the different pairings of roles definitely change the like brand of capitalism, and I tried to represent that in like the names of the roles. So for example, and like capitalism kind of always is a little counterintuitive with whatever role it's paired with. So you can be the estate who is a capitalist but also a conservationist. Your goal is to keep the river as clean as, like you want to own everything and you want it to be beautiful. The example I talk about in the field guide is the Rockefeller estate. The Rockefellers famously helped create national parks along the Hudson River because they didn't want to ruin their view. They had a mansion there, and they were like, when I look across at all this land I own, I don't want to have to look at a factory over there. I want to see beautiful forests, so I'm going to create a national park. At the same time, Rockefeller made his money off of crude oil. So it's like, that's not exactly environmentally friendly. And in the same way, like in We All Take from the River, you're now, instead of just being like, oh, I'm capital, you're also like, I'm trying to create this industry that makes me tons and tons of money, but I'm also trying to clean everything up as I do it. Versus the philanthropist, which is one of my favorite goals, which is capital and charity, is I want to help other people, but I want to make sure I still get mine. And I think that's very real too. Like when I hear about philanthropy in real life, that is like very real to me. I think that is really the essence of it, is like you never hear about, or you rarely do hear about a philanthropist who stops being rich, right? Like you hear about the wonderful kind things Bill Gates is doing. Well, why is he still such a billionaire? If he's doing all this, yeah, that's a lot of really nice stuff, but he's not going to sacrifice being a billionaire. That one won't go away. And so like these different kind of pairings of, yes, capital is kind of the same, just get a lot of money, but whatever your secondary objective is really going to inform how you pursue that goal. And I think so. It does kind of change the flavor going from capitalist to capitalist.
Awesome. I would agree as a player. I found that to be fairly true in my experiences generally. So that's a great note on having those dual goals really kind of create that character experience. Cool. Kind of going back into some of the more the Multivictor stuff as well. Obviously, state of nature plays a big role in this game mechanically, narratively, player relations, all of it. It also feeds a lot into that sort of Multivictor play where players, as we talked about, they aid each other, they have conflict with one another. How can designers take lessons from nature or our relationship to nature to sort of create these Multivictor experiences? And I know you've dipped into that a little bit throughout this conversation, but any kind of general notes or philosophies that designers can kind of grab onto for their next game?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's everywhere. Like just view the world. Board games are just another art form, and art is representing the things you see in reality. It's communicating that through your lens. And so as you are going about in your day-to-day life, look for what are the interesting ways that people interact with each other or not people interact with each other. A game that has kind of been bouncing around in my mind and I've tried to make and hasn't quite come out yet as like a finished piece is some kind of ecosystem game. It would be like a guys on the map war game in quotes, but instead of playing as your different factions are predator, prey, and plants. And when you think about that kind of ecosystem, that's also a multi-victor game because they're all depending on each other. Predators want to eat prey, but they don't want to eat so much prey to destroy the prey. That would be to their detriment as well. And so like, that's just an example of, again, something I've seen in nature that has made me think like, oh, that could be a game. I find a frustration that I tend to feel is when there's a game that sort of promises that but doesn't deliver, where they didn't consider, what are the actual mechanics that surround this theme we're talking about. So like if there's a game about, and I'm not naming any specific games here when I say this, but like say there is a game about trees growing and the actual mechanics of the game don't really make you feel like trees are growing. It just feels like this was a cool mechanism. And then you decided to put on the veneer of, okay, it's about plants.
Right.
To me, that's like, and that's not, there's nothing wrong with that. Like you can do that and you can say, okay, what was cool about this is the mechanism. And that's also like, there's a lot to work with there of like, okay, if I set these set of rules, what happens? But if I'm playing a game about trees, I want to learn about trees.
Right.
And so I just think like when you're looking in the world, look for things and think, how would I represent that as a board game mechanic?
Love it. And true. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my biggest pet peeves are games that are like present the aesthetics of like a cozy experience, but then like the actual mechanical play is like capitalist grind set trying to get the most points. Yeah. The Zen garden ones are the ones that really get me. Like have the most Zen garden.
Yeah, this is a Zen garden, but only one of you can win.
Yeah, only one of you will be really Zen.
I guess it'd be true to form. Like I feel like maybe the publishers start making I would embrace it if they're like, this is a cutthroat to the death gardening game, right? Only one of you is getting out of this. Like, like this is gardening gladiator style. So they like your gladiators go out into the arena, they plant gardens, and then one walks away, right? At least be honest about it.
Yeah. If you're doing that, then I want it to be like, you can be like the neighborhood association game or like
yeah. An HOA game.
I think you can own that in some really cool ways.
Oh my gosh, that'd be amazing. So what's next for you in your game design journey? I know you kind of just gave a hint on something you're working on,
Mhm.
but do you think you're going to keep pursuing games with these multi-victor end states? Are these the types of games that you're kind of interested in continuing to make?
So as I've like gotten more into the scene, I picked self-publishing pretty early on because I was like, I don't know that any publisher would publish this game,
Hmm.
and I don't. There are changes I just don't want to make. Like if they ask me to make certain compromises, I'm going to have to say hard no.
Right.
And there's right now as a designer, I'm sort of branching into two paths where there's some games I'm sort of bouncing around, which are like, yeah, if someone told me they want to publish this, but they want to make a bunch of changes to it, that's fine. I don't really care what happens to it. Versus other games like this game, which right now I'm calling it Eat, Pray, Love. That's its
Nice.
working title. Like that doesn't have a rigid structure to it yet. It's really not like a designed game, but it's something that I have such a clear vision of what I want it to do that I couldn't handle a publisher trying to tell me, actually, we want to turn this into a single victor game or something like that. So that's going to be like basically I'm saving those for being self-published. So like
Right.
an example of a game that I have that is kind of in the works. I have one game actually I'm working on with a friend that I'm self-publishing that also is a single victor game, and it was originally designed. It's called Galleries. You play as rival museum curators, and you're really just you're trying to curate a museum to make your private gallery as valuable as possible. Um, and it's a pretty simple game, and that's just like what I'm most that's what I'm closest to publishing next. But it's one of these. It's definitely not like the game itself. I'm like, yeah, it's cool. Like I'm happy to put it out there. I like it. I think it's a good game. It's less like a passion project like We All Take from the River was.
Right.
I have a no victor game in mind that is in the works, which is also like a kind of, yeah, it's cool. I don't think there's a lot to it. It is so it's an attempt to make an infinite board game. When I say infinite in this case, I mean the game you lose when the game ends. So the
Right.
goal is to just keep the game going as long as possible. Think like bouncing on a pogo stick. You're just trying to get your score as high as possible. And at some point, you're going to fall off the pogo stick, and then you've lost.
Right.
There's no victory end state. And so in this game, you are a spaceship, and you are spiraling into a black hole or a supernova or some gravitational force, and you're stuck. You're gonna go down the drain, and your goal is just to last as long as possible by bouncing your spaceship and evading comets, and and maybe you're also shooting at each other if there's other people in the around because they're in your way. So that's another game that's kind of in the works for me.
Love it.
Like we're all going into this black hole, but I'm going to be the last one to go down the black
Yeah.
hole.
Well, it's an interesting thing. Is like, so if you're making a multi-victor game or a no-victor game, like, do you want to restrict players from being able to just decide, actually, this is a game with a winner? So,
Right.
like, in this case, I would say, like, whatever. But players might just say, like, oh, yeah, whoever's last in the black hole, that's the winner. And now it's a game with a winner. And I'm fine with that. But if it was really, truly meant to be a no-victor game, I would want to come up with some reason why they can't make that decision.
Interesting. Okay, cool. I love
You
it.
could, like yeah, you could like have the game say like you don't compare who win last because you're all dead. You can't compare.
Yeah, like, you could just tell them, like, what do you mean you won? You're dead.
Yeah, you're dead. You're all dead. One
Oh
of you is dead
no.
a little bit later.
Hey, I won. Gone. Oh no. Yeah, so it's interesting. I wish I've been trying to find this game for a while, and I spent some time looking it up recently. So I'm also working on a victorless infinite game right now, but it's a gardening game, and it's for that Button Shy's 18 card cozy contest. I had a great opportunity to let Zoe, and I think Brooks was in here earlier playtesting it, but that was inspired. But there was a game that came out ages ago, and it was inspired by Animal Crossing. It was like an infinite game, and you had like a little town management thing, and it just never ended. And I can't find the name of this game, and it's baffling me. But that was like my first interaction with like a sort of no victor or victorless experience, and I thought that was such a cool little thing, right? It blew my mind at the time. And so I'm really hoping games like what you just mentioned kind of go a little bit further, and we also see things like Heather mentioned, party games kind of embrace this a little bit more. I'm of the perspective that publishers will start embracing these things more in the mainstream once they see and it demonstratively work. Right? It's very much a thing I talk about this a lot. Like no one believes anything's going to work in capitalism until it does work, and then everyone's like, "Oh yeah, this was a brilliant idea. We always believed in it," and then they're going to go all in on it.
Right, exactly. And like if you can show like yeah, you can sell a lot. I mean, cuz that's what they care about,
Yeah.
right? Like you can make some really brilliant. I think it's the same, again, games is like any other art form. You have this I don't really like the literary to commercial spectrum, but
Mm-hmm.
in this case it works pretty well to say like you can have these games that are very literary where you're not really going to sell that many copies, but you're making some kind of statement. And like I, as a game designer, love to encounter those because I can say like, "Whoa, look what you're doing."
Right.
But at the same time, like if you're trying to make money, you're trying to sell games, and if you can make a game that's multi-victor or no victor that really sells, like people just want to keep playing it. That I think is what's going to push it over to say like, "Oh yeah, oh we can make money off of this." Great, let's go for it.
100%. Yeah, totally. I hope it happens. I want it to happen. We're pushing for
Yeah,
it.
it would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could have it that when the moment the first person dies, everyone dies. Then it becomes a pretty cooperative game. Then it's like, all right, guys, how can we help each other out to make sure that nobody dies? Because once you die, I'm dead too.
Mm.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I could also see a just now we're going in design brainstorm mode. I could see, I'd love a legacy version of it where everyone goes away and someone somehow leaves something behind outside of this black hole, and that calls the next group to show up trying to figure out what happened, and then they get sucked in. It's just an infinite loop of people trying to understand what happened, and they all just keep getting sucked into the black hole. So whenever you put the game away, you leave a note for the next time you actually play.
Yeah.
And that's a totally
And they've
new
left,
for
like,
explorers.
There's some loot box orbiting the black hole that you can pick up. You're like, oh, cool, we found the remnants of a ship. We can get, an extra cannon or whatever it is.
Yeah, all right, let's get out of here.
Like
Wait,
maybe,
what?
Uh-oh.
maybe there actually is a way to get out, but only if like multiple generations of like trapped astronauts like build something over the course of several like lifetimes, and like something gets left behind by like they get sucked into a black hole and they find the machine that actually lets them escape.
I mean, whether or not it's this game, I think the concept of a legacy game where like you are not going to win this round that you play, but you are setting up so that maybe in the distant future someone might win. That is such a cool idea. That is such a cool concept for like the a game that teaches you to plant trees whose shade you will not lie in. Like that's such an awesome idea.
There's an interesting maybe bouncing off that, there's an interesting world of delayed gratification that is very hard to accomplish in board games, because in board games a lot of it is about gratification now. How do I get dopamine? How do I get gratification from this specific moment? Delayed gratification is something I'd like to see more in board games, but I definitely recognize it as a challenge. I do think victorless games have a unique opportunity to explore it, as long as the right expectations are set, because they tend to be more narrative. And I also think RPGs have been doing delayed gratification, in my opinion, for a long time, in the context of like you're doing things that lead to narrative buildup, etc. And I think that there's a lot of notes we can take from that world that we just haven't successfully done or just haven't chosen to do yet in board game world.
I haven't played Vantage, but I've heard it kind of is reaching towards that.
Nice.
Like there's and like I think there's other legacy games now that do this. I have an issue with legacy games just on like the single use aspect of them. But like if it's a legacy game you can continue to use and it's not like you're going to throw it away after you've played it whatever many times. I think it is cool to have like, you can have spoilers. Like you can right. have it be like, oh, I have to keep playing because I have to get to the point where, I unlock this area, or I learn there's some secret here I don't know, and I'm not going to find out unless I've played the game enough. And that's pretty cool to me.
Right. Awesome. Pi in chat says, I wanted to make a game about time loops where you have to forget everything you learned by having new players play it the next time, but that's too hard to make.
Yeah, because it asks a lot of the player.
Yeah.
You have to ask them to role play that they have forgotten, and that's like I think that's kind of one of the things I mean when I say motivational systems is like it's different than Dungeons and Dragons or any role playing game. D&D is the most common one, but like the reason it's different is that you're trying to make a system that forces them to do that. So they'll do it no matter what. You don't have to ask them, "Hey, please obey these rules," even though that doesn't really feel right to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so like if you could come up with like something that scrambles it so it's like it's different than it was before, but like no, I agree that that's a really hard ask from, and maybe it's possible and it's a very cool concept, but it'd be really hard to design.
I could see a very
Or,
small, light, tight game that could work if you're
Yeah.
passing on a journal or something like that. Sorry, Zoe, I think I interrupted you.
oh no, no, I was gonna say like yeah, like having it pass to new players to play. Yeah,
Yeah.
if like the game was like into it, because like I feel like a lot of people they play a game and then they're like, okay, now I know how to play it next time. But when you're designing these games that are meant to be played a single time, they have to be like really, really clean and simple and easy to understand on their first go. But if you're trying to make something where it's like you're unraveling like a puzzle over time loops, that's going to be really tricky.
I heard about a game, someone told me about a game where it was like designed that the rules were ridiculously complicated. And one of the rules was if you get a rule wrong, that's part of the game. You're not allowed to go back. Like,
Ooh.
no saying, oh, wait, we didn't understand this. Let's like revise the past. That's part of like, we've made all these rules super complicated so that you will make mistakes. And that is part of the experience.
Oh, that's awesome. Becomes
Yeah.
your story that you're making. That's cool. Awesome.
Right.
Well, I know we're kind of getting close to the end of the hour here. We're at least approaching it. I'd like to know a little bit more about, how can we find more about you? How can we find more about your games project? What you're working on.
So I have a website. It is wealltakefromtheriver.com. Probably that is going to slowly grow. It's just going to stay wealltakefromtheriver.com, but it's going to, my publishing name is, or my studio is Crownfish Games. And I'm hoping that will include more than one game at some point. And so like, I plan to update that website. Right now, that website just looks like a little online store for We All Take from the River. Like it just has a buy button and it's got the description of that game below it. I'm not super prevalent on social media. That's a skill I've never fully developed. So like I have a Facebook group, but I don't post a lot. I'm in a few Discord channels, but I don't talk a lot. So I hate to say it, but it's gonna be just when I'm ready, I'll pop back out of my hole with a new game, and hopefully people find it interesting. And if you don't, then that's fine too.
Well, for those in this community, we'll probably shout out your games at some point in here. So I'm sure
Oh,
that'll
it's
be a
so
great way for folks to follow along.
and I am trying to like I'd like to play some of your Multivictor games. That's something that I'm trying to learn of. And I know, I think Matthew, you are in the DMV area, right? So that is feasible, or
So admittedly, I was in the DMV area my whole life. I moved down. I'm still pretty much there. I'm in Richmond now,
okay.
But I'm right, just an hour and a half down the road, the very long road.
I'll just hop on the train.
Yeah. But always, I do come up to the DMV pretty regularly, so happy to schedule a game whenever.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it was great having you on today. Thanks so much for joining us and talking to us about your design journey and experience. This was awesome, and I look forward to playing some games with you.
Yeah, I so appreciate your having me on.
All right.
Wonderful to meet you.
Have a great one.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.